May 17, 2005. The sun had barely risen over the quiet suburbs of Alexandria, Kentucky, when a chilling 911 call shattered the stillness. A woman's voice, frantic, breathless, screamed down the line. "Someone's broken in, my husband's been shot." Police rushed to the Bosley residence. From the outside, the house looked untouched, just another peaceful home in a good neighborhood. But inside, it was chaos. Drawers flung open, furniture overturned, glass littered the floor from a shattered rear door. And in the bedroom, one man, motionless. Robert "Bob" Bosley was dead. At first glance, it looked like a violent home invasion. But something didn't sit right. The children's accounts didn't align with their mother's story. And then officers found something hidden deep inside the washing machine, something that unraveled the entire narrative. Who would want Bob Bosley dead? And why? The answers would shake the entire town. Born August 2, 1962, Bob Bosley wasn't just another name in the neighborhood, he was a self-made millionaire. Raised in a tight-knit Christian family in Alexandria, Bob had hustle in his blood. As a teenager, he cleaned chimneys and repaired roofs. By his late 20s, he had built an empire, Bosley Roofing and Chimney Sweep, a business that flourished under his hard-nosed work ethic and charismatic charm. But roofing was just the beginning. Bob bought rental homes, 20 of them. The money flowed like water, and with wealth came extravagance. Sports cars. Private planes. Guns. And a yacht that turned Lake Cumberland into his personal party cove, complete with booze, bikini-clad guests, and whispered stories that never left the water. It was at a local restaurant that Bob met 18-year-old Amy Pave, a waitress paying her way through college. Amy came from struggle. Her father battled alcoholism, and money was always tight. But she had grit and ambition. The older, wealthier Bob saw something in her, and Amy, perhaps tired of scraping by, saw in him a way out. She was shy at first. But the lake parties changed that. Soon she was a regular, then, the main event. Bob fell hard. They married 4 years later, and Amy traded her waitress uniform for diamonds and designer bags. Their fairy tale looked perfect. They had 2 kids, Morgan in 1996, and Trevor in 1999. Amy became the doting mother, the public face of the perfect family. But behind the smiles and suburban normalcy, something dark simmered. Bob still partied. Still chased thrills. And there was one frustration he couldn't seem to fix, something that would eventually cost him everything. Behind every great empire, there's a hidden weight, and for Bob Bosley, that weight was the mountain of administrative work he loathed. Payrolls, taxes, contractors, invoices, it wasn't his style. Bob was a man of action, not spreadsheets. The open lake and wild weekends called louder than any office ever could. More and more, Bob would vanish aboard his luxurious boat, sometimes gone for entire weekends. He never said where he was going, and honestly, few dared to ask. Close friends would later whisper that Bob seemed to be retreating from family life, drifting back into his old ways, indulgence, secrecy, and maybe even something more. There were murmurs, perhaps he and Amy had an understanding, an open marriage. No one knew for sure. But what's certain is that Bob didn't want to deal with the stress of the business anymore. So, he turned to Amy. She had a background in business administration, and on the surface, she was the perfect choice. When he asked her to take over the financial side of the company, she seemed unsure. But eventually, she accepted. And just like that, Amy Bosley was no longer just the homemaker or supportive wife, she was the one holding the purse strings of $1 million business. At first, everything seemed perfect. Business was booming, the money was rolling in, and the Bosleys were living in a picturesque log cabin while building their dream home nearby, a sprawling estate nestled on 14 acres, complete with stained glass windows, a medieval-style stone tower, and even Gothic gargoyles. It was their version of a castle in the Kentucky woods. To neighbors and the local church community, they were the embodiment of success, attractive, generous, active in their children's school, and always ready to lend a hand. Bob even donated roofing services to families in need. He was admired, respected, envied. But behind the smiles and picture-perfect image, a much darker story was unfolding. With complete control of the company's finances, Amy saw something Bob never did: how easy it was to divert money without raising suspicion. And as Bob busied himself with parties, new investments, and their mansion's construction, Amy quietly started funneling money away from the business. It started small. But soon, instead of paying the company's taxes, she rerouted funds into a secret personal account. She controlled all correspondence from the IRS, ensuring any letters, calls, or warnings never reached Bob. She had set up a private mailbox where only she received government communication. For years, Amy kept the illusion going. But the IRS doesn't forget. The unpaid taxes began raising red flags, and the pressure was building. Letters became urgent. Audits were looming. The perfect life was now cracking, and Amy knew it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. Then came Tuesday, May 17, 2005, just days before Bob and Amy's 15th wedding anniversary. At exactly 5 a.m., Boone County dispatchers received a 911 call. It was Amy. Her voice trembled with panic. She claimed an intruder had broken in. But midway through the call, a loud crashing sound cut the line. Dispatchers attempted to reconnect, but the line was dead. Police and paramedics were immediately dispatched to the Bosley cabin. What they found was shocking. Amy stood outside, barefoot, her face pale and hands trembling as she clutched her 2 children. Her sister soon arrived to care for the kids while Amy was taken for questioning. Police secured the home and called in forensic teams. Believing a killer was on the loose, officers scoured the dense woods surrounding the cabin with dogs and even a helicopter, searching for a suspect who may not have existed. Inside the bedroom, they found what would unravel Amy's version of events. Bob Bosley was dead. But what the officers would uncover next, would leave even the most seasoned detective speechless. Bob Bosley's lifeless body was found kneeling beside the bed, slumped forward, his torso riddled with gunshot wounds. It was a chilling scene. But strangely, only 2 shell casings were found near him. That single detail flipped the investigation on its head. Something wasn't right. Instead of answers, every new discovery raised more questions. As investigators combed through the cabin, what they found didn't align with the story of a quick, violent break-in. Apart from the children's bedrooms, the entire house was in disarray, almost too disarrayed. Kitchen cabinets stood open, including the ones beneath the sink. Why would a thief search there? A rear window was shattered, but most of the glass was outside, not inside, suggesting it was broken from within. In the bathroom, the medicine cabinet was thrown open. Prescription bottles were scattered across the floor, but there was no sign that anything was actually taken. It all looked more like a chaotic performance. An attempt to imitate a robbery gone wrong. Amy's 911 call had mentioned a fleeing intruder, yet the house was left in an eerily staged state. Detectives began interviewing Amy at the station. She appeared rattled, crying at times, confused at others, stumbling over her timeline. Her story was full of odd details. She described the intruder as a white male with a nasal voice, foul breath, and a distinct smell of urine. She claimed he had attacked her and Bob, even pointing to 2 marks on her chest as proof. When pressed about potential enemies, Amy painted Bob in a troubling light. She said he wasn't well liked. That he had a reckless streak and could have made enemies. She even named a longtime friend and contractor, Noah Heim, as a possible suspect, mentioning a recent argument between him and Bob. But Noah's alibi was rock solid. He had been miles away that morning and was devastated by Bob's murder. Still, Amy's story triggered a wave of fear throughout Alexandria. Schools shut down for days. People locked their doors. The thought of a killer roaming free was terrifying. Bob had been a pillar of the community. Kind, generous, always willing to help. The town couldn't believe someone would want him dead. Back at the crime scene, investigators kept digging. The 2 shell casings by Bob's body didn't match the number of wounds. So they expanded the search. Down in the basement, they opened the family's washing machine. What they found was bizarre, and damning. Inside, soaking wet clothing and, wrapped inside a folded cloth, for more shell casings. Why would a killer, one supposedly fleeing in panic, take the time to hide evidence in a washing machine? The answer was simple: they wouldn't. Nearby, officers also discovered an aluminum baseball bat with fresh scuff marks and traces of white residue. Lab tests would later be ordered to determine its relevance, but the picture was becoming clearer. Amy was allowed to go home and reunite with her children, for now. But detectives weren't buying her story. The crime scene didn't feel real. Expensive electronics and cash were left untouched. Amy's grief felt shallow. No real tears. No visible shock. Just, performance. And then, the final piece fell into place. 2 IRS agents showed up at the station after learning about Bob's death. They revealed something the detectives didn't know: Bob Bosley had been under intense financial scrutiny. The company owed over $1.7 million in unpaid taxes. A face-to-face meeting with the IRS had been scheduled for the very morning he was found dead. And there was more. During a prior phone call with the company, an IRS agent spoke with someone claiming to be Bob. But the voice on the line had sounded off. High-pitched. Strained. Like someone pretending. The agent was convinced it wasn't Bob, but a woman trying to sound like a man. That voice was Amy's. It was the smoking gun. She had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from the roofing business, money meant for taxes, rerouted into a private account under her control. For years, she had hidden the IRS letters, dodged their calls, and created a paper trail of lies. And now, with the IRS preparing to confront Bob face to face, the truth was finally on the verge of exposure. But Amy couldn't let that happen. There was also a personal storm brewing beneath the surface. Rumors of Bob's infidelity had swirled for years. And Amy's resentment had been simmering in silence. Bob's own sister later told investigators she once overheard Amy say, in a half-joking tone, "If Bob ever cheats or leaves me, I'll shoot him." At the time, no one took her seriously. Now, that offhand comment felt like a confession. What once sounded like a dark joke, Amy Bosley's chilling comment that she'd shoot her husband if he ever cheated, now echoed like a promise fulfilled. Despite the growing mountain of evidence against her, Amy clung to her innocence. During a second police interrogation, she appeared composed, even sorrowful. She admitted their marriage had seen better days, what marriage hadn't, but insisted she still loved Bob. There was no reason, she claimed, for her to ever harm the father of her children. But investigators saw something else entirely. Ballistics testing had tied all 6 bullets that tore through Bob's body to the 6 shell casings, 2 from the bedroom, and 4 suspiciously stashed in the washing machine. The timeline Amy provided had already begun to fray. Then came the moment that cracked her story wide open. Detectives interviewed Morgan and Trevor Bosley, Amy and Bob's children, just 9 and 6 years old. They were questioned separately. Still, their stories matched down to the smallest detail. Both said they'd fallen asleep peacefully, only to be jolted awake by 6 loud gunshots. Moments later, they heard glass shattering. But according to Amy, the glass had broken first, the shots came after. That inconsistency wasn't just a memory lapse, it flipped the entire narrative. Even the wounds Amy had shown, 2 faint scratches on her chest, now looked staged. Too symmetrical. Too perfect. More like self-inflicted marks than the result of a chaotic struggle. Forensic examination of her blouse revealed the final damning detail: the fabric hadn't torn during a scuffle. It had been cut, cleanly, with scissors, then tugged apart to fake the appearance of damage. Less than 2 weeks after Bob's murder, Amy Bosley was arrested and formally charged. But one key question remained unanswered: where was the murder weapon? The discovery of the gun is still shrouded in contradiction. One version claims police found the firearm, one of Bob's own handguns, hidden in Amy's handbag behind a wardrobe. Another account says it was Amy's sister, now caring for the children, who found the gun while sorting through Amy's belongings. Either way, the result was the same: a lawyer was called, and the weapon was handed over to police. Ballistics confirmed it: this was the gun that matched the casings from the bedroom and the laundry. The bullets inside Bob's body were too damaged for a definitive match, but the circumstantial evidence was tightening like a noose. When the trial began, prosecutors painted a brutal, methodical picture. For years, Amy had been draining Bob's business from the inside, embezzling hundreds of thousands meant for taxes and funneling them into a secret account. To keep the IRS off their backs, she intercepted mail, redirected notices, and even impersonated Bob over the phone. But it couldn't last forever. May 17, 2005. That was the date the IRS had scheduled a face-to-face meeting with Bob. He had no idea what they were walking into. But Amy did. She knew that morning would bring exposure. Divorce. Public disgrace. And most terrifying of all, prison. So, the night before, while her children slept nearby, Amy retrieved one of Bob's own firearms. Some reports even suggest she may have sedated the children to keep them from waking. She waited until Bob drifted off, then crept to his bedside. She pulled the trigger. Bob didn't die immediately. Wounded, confused, and disoriented, he fought to stand, to reach out, to stop whoever was shooting him. But as he turned, the awful realization dawned: his attacker was Amy. The woman he had built a life with. The woman he trusted with his heart, his home, and his legacy. Bleeding and betrayed, Bob tried to fight back. But it was too late. Amy fired again. And again. Until the man who had built his fortune from nothing was dead, kneeling beside the bed they once shared. She had tried to cover her tracks. A shattered window. Scattered pills. Cut fabric. But it was all an illusion. Not born of panic. Born of greed. Amy Bosley's carefully constructed world, filled with community respect, family vacations, and the illusion of a happy marriage, came crashing down in a single night of cold, calculated betrayal. What remained in the aftermath was a devastated family, a stunned small town, and a legacy of deceit that would echo long after the headlines faded. To make her lie convincing, Amy went to disturbing lengths. She shattered the rear sliding glass door with a family baseball bat. She tore through cabinets, appended drawers, scattered pill bottles, and rifled through closets, crafting the chaos of a supposed break-in. Then, she took 4 spent bullet casings and wrapped them in a cloth, hiding them deep inside the washing machine. The injuries on her chest. Not the result of a violent struggle, but carefully inflicted with what was likely a pair of scissors. Her blouse wasn't torn in desperation, it had been cleanly slashed, then manually ripped to appear as if she'd fought for her life. Her 911 call was frantic, her voice trembling, her words panicked. But the scene? Entirely staged. And forensic science didn't lie. Lab analysis confirmed that the glass shards embedded in the aluminum bat matched the broken back door. There were no signs of forced entry beyond that shattered glass, no footprints in the dirt outside, no tire tracks, no witnesses. No one matching Amy's description of the supposed intruder had been seen coming or going that night. Because no one had come. There was no masked intruder. Just Amy. As investigators dug deeper into the Bosleys' private life, the image of a happy family eroded. Amy had long suspected Bob of cheating. That suspicion wasn't unfounded. Photos later discovered inside a safe showed Bob at wild parties on Lake Cumberland, confirming at least one affair. But jealousy wasn't the sole motive. It was the money. Amy had been embezzling for years, nearly $2 million secretly siphoned from her husband's construction business. She had failed to pay the IRS, diverted funds into shadowy channels, and lied to cover her tracks. The IRS meeting scheduled for May 17, the very next morning after Bob's murder, was the end of the line. Everything would have been exposed. In Amy's mind, killing Bob would erase the problem. With him gone, she believed his assets could cover the debt, and she could quietly walk away with what remained. But her plan was full of cracks. The children's statements were the first blow. They'd heard the gunshots before the sound of breaking glass, contradicting Amy's timeline entirely. Then there was the forensic evidence. Though Amy's defense tried to claim the bullet casings could have been dropped by Bob himself after a visit to the shooting range, the claim fell flat. There was no DNA linking anyone else to the crime scene, and the details kept tightening around her. Still, Amy's defense team clung to one final hope: reasonable doubt. They argued there were no direct witnesses. No fingerprints on the gun. The bullets inside Bob were too damaged for a ballistic match. If they could inject just enough uncertainty, they might sway the jury. But prosecutors faced a heart-wrenching dilemma. Bringing the case to trial would mean forcing Morgan and Trevor, just children, to testify against their mother. To describe the night they woke to gunfire, unaware that the killer was the very woman who tucked them into bed. It was a price they weren't willing to pay. So they made a deal. Amy Bosley accepted a plea agreement. In exchange for her guilty plea, she avoided a public trial. Her children were spared from taking the stand. She would serve a reduced sentence, but there was one chilling condition. Amy never had to say where the missing millions went. Even in confession, some secret stayed buried. On November 2, 2006, Amy Bosley stepped into a Campbell County courtroom wearing a green and white prison jumpsuit. Her face was blank, her posture still. But the air in that courtroom was anything but calm. Before the judge handed down her sentence, Bob Bosley's family had their chance to speak, and they didn't hold back. Bob's brother, James, rose first. His voice shook, not with fear, but fury. He called Amy what the entire town had come to believe: a liar, a fraud, a woman who had betrayed her family and her community. He warned her that while prison might one day set her free, she'd never escape the ghosts of what she'd done. Every night, he said, you'll see Bob's face, and the tears of the children you left behind. Then came Deborah, Bob's sister. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just asked the one question that haunted them all. Did he beg you to stop? Amy never answered. Last to speak was Bob's mother, Audrey, frail, heartbroken, and trembling with grief. She read a letter aloud, her voice breaking as she mourned the goodbye she never got. Her son was ripped from her without warning. No final words. No closure. Just silence. Throughout it all, Amy sat quietly, eyes on the floor. She wiped away a tear, but never said a word. The judge, bound by the terms of her plea deal, acknowledged the devastation she'd caused, not just to Bob, but to their children, to the community, and to herself. Then came the sentence, 20 years in prison. Under Kentucky law, that meant Amy would be eligible for parole after serving 85% of her sentence, 17 years behind bars. And so, on May 17, 2022, exactly 17 years to the day after Bob Bosley's murder, Amy Bosley, then 54, quietly walked out of the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women. No cameras. No crowds. No public apology. Just silence. Most media outlets barely noticed. Her release passed like a whisper. As of today, her whereabouts remain unknown. But some believe she may have gone searching for the millions she once siphoned away, money that, to this day, has never been fully accounted for. Bob Bosley, meanwhile, rests in peace at St. Stephen Cemetery in Campbell County, Kentucky. A man remembered not for how he died, but how he lived, generous, driven, and devoted to his family. A man whose greatest betrayal came not from a stranger, but from the person who once promised to love him forever. Looking back, Amy Bosley's choices seem both tragic and senseless. She wasn't destitute. Bob wasn't abusive. The IRS might have negotiated. And if revenge truly was her motive, divorce could have left her wealthy, and free. But she didn't choose escape. She chose execution. And as the old American proverb, made famous by Benjamin Franklin, goes, "Nothing is certain except death and taxes." In Amy Bosley's case, both came knocking. Lessons drawn from the Amy Bosley case. 1. Greed can destroy more than just wealth, it can shatter lives. Amy Bosley's story is a chilling reminder of how greed, once left unchecked, can spiral into something monstrous. What started as financial mismanagement, failing to pay taxes and secretly embezzling funds from her husband's company, quickly evolved into layers of deception, lies, and ultimately, murder. Amy wasn't poor. She lived in a beautiful home, had a loving family, and shared in the success Bob had built from the ground up. But the hunger to maintain a facade, avoid consequences, and protect her secrets overtook every moral compass she once had. Instead of facing accountability or working with Bob to repair the damage, Amy chose a deadly shortcut. In doing so, she didn't just lose her freedom, she obliterated her family. 2 children lost both parents in a single night, one to murder, the other to incarceration. The extended family, community, and business were all left picking up the pieces. This story proves that when financial gain becomes more important than relationships, values, and life itself, the consequences are not just legal, they are deeply personal and irreversible. Greed doesn't just bankrupt bank accounts. It bankrupts souls. 2. Lies always unravel, no matter how carefully they're stitched. Amy Bosley meticulously staged the crime scene. She shattered glass to simulate a break-in, planted shell casings in the laundry, and even cut her own chest to make her wounds look real. On the surface, it seemed like a clever deception. But like most lies, it began to fall apart the moment truth entered the room. Her own children heard the gunshots before the glass shattered. The cuts on her chest were too symmetrical. Her blouse had been snipped with scissors, not torn in a struggle. Forensic science told a story that contradicted every word she said. Even the gun, initially hidden and later discovered, tied directly back to Bob's collection, not some imaginary intruder's weapon. What this teaches us is simple yet powerful: lies are temporary. Truth has the patience to wait. No matter how convincing a performance may seem in the short term, the inconsistencies will pile up. The real world, through forensic evidence, witness testimony, and time, has a way of peeling back the layers of falsehood. In a society obsessed with appearances, Amy's case is a sobering example of how quickly illusion can turn to exposure, and how devastating that exposure can be when built on a foundation of deceit. 3. Crime doesn't just take a life, it echoes through generations. When Amy Bosley pulled that trigger, she didn't just end Bob's life, she rewrote the entire future of her family. Morgan and Trevor Bosley went to bed in what they thought was a safe home, only to wake up to gunshots and chaos. They lost their father, their protector, and in many ways, their mother too. No child should have to testify in a murder case involving a parent. No child should grow up haunted by memories of blood and betrayal. The psychological scars of that night didn't fade with time. These children had to grow up carrying the burden of that tragedy, grappling with identity, trust, and trauma. They weren't just victims of circumstance, they were casualties of their mother's choices. Amy's crime stretched beyond a single moment of violence. It infected birthdays, graduations, holidays. Every milestone that should have been celebrated with joy now carries an invisible shadow. This case reminds us that murder doesn't happen in a vacuum. It rips apart families, shatters trust, and causes long-term damage to innocent people. The consequences don't end with an arrest or a sentence. They linger, through generations, relationships, and every moment that could have been different. 4. Love without trust is a time bomb waiting to explode. On the surface, Amy and Bob Bosley seemed like a successful couple. They built a life together, raised children, and were seen as respected members of their community. But beneath that polished image was a slow-burning fire of secrets, mistrust, and emotional distance. Amy believed Bob was unfaithful, something that deeply wounded her. But instead of seeking counseling, separation, or even open confrontation, she buried her pain beneath lies and led a double life of financial deceit. Trust, once broken and left unresolved, metastasized into something far more dangerous. Relationships, no matter how solid they seem externally, crumble when the foundation is cracked. Love, on its own, is not enough. Without communication, honesty, and mutual respect, love can turn toxic, and in Amy's case, deadly. This case is a tragic example of what happens when silence replaces vulnerability. When unspoken resentment festers. When one partner is left to shoulder the truth alone, or worse, hide it. If Amy had trusted Bob enough to tell him about the IRS or confronted him directly about infidelity, the outcome might have been heartbreak, yes, but not bloodshed. In the end, love without trust isn't strength. It's a powder keg, and when it explodes, it leaves destruction in its wake. 5. The truth always has a witness, even if it's just time. For a brief moment, Amy Bosley may have believed she had gotten away with it. The scene was staged, the intruder narrative was in place, and her injuries looked dramatic enough to sway suspicion. But what she didn't count on was the most unlikely witnesses, her children.